It's Bonnie with So Inspired by Bonnie with another Tuesday's tip. I'm going to refresh my page here so that I can make sure that we're actually live and that I'm not just talking to myself. And if you are with us, go ahead and give me a shout and let me know you're there. And as always, I will answer the questions at the end of the little spiel, and hopefully my computer will cooperate with me, and hopefully we won't lose the live feed in the middle of the conversation like we did last week. But we'll get this up. And I accidentally hit the wrong button. That's what happens when I try to do things left-handed and I'm a righty. I hope everyone's having a really good week and you're doing a lot of sewing and getting some UFOs done. Oh, I see some. There we go. Hi, Judy. Hi, Tammy. Okay, looks like some people are starting to show up. So let's go ahead and get started. Couple of little things to, I keep hitting the wrong button with my left hand. Oh, now we're getting me back talking here. A couple of little things to get out of the way before we get started. If you don't know, go ahead and click on the follow button on the Facebook page. That way you'll get notifications when I do go live. And if you don't get to see it live, I will repost this on the YouTube channel as well as my Pinterest page. And it'll also be on my Facebook page under the videos. So you can refer things back if you happen to miss out on the live version of this. And also be sure to sign up for my newsletter at www.soinspiredbybonnie.com. That's on my website, and you'll get notifications of sales and new releases, and also when we're doing a live video. So it's good to stay in touch that way. Okay, it looks like, hi Pam. Some of you are saying you couldn't get me before, but you could now, probably because I wasn't here a few minutes ago. I mean, I was here, but I wasn't live. Okay, so let's get started. Today we're going to discuss a couple of things about thread shredding. I know a lot of people run into thread shredding issues. I know I've run into it in the past, so and I hear about it all the time where they're like, my machine just does not like that kind of thread. Well, that might be true, but probably there's something going on, some combination of something that we can figure out and make you and your machine communicate better and get through those issues. So I did do a video a couple of months ago on thread shredding, and this kind of continues on that talk because I learned something new. And I've always said, you always are going to learn something new in our hobby. It never stays the same where you just get to a point and then you know everything there is to know. I'm just like you. I'm always learning new things and new tricks in my ammunition of problem solving. So I want to pass those things on to you as I learn them so that you know them too. And maybe when you're sewing in the middle of the night, wee hours, like I have a tendency to do, and the dealer's not open, or you're too far away, you can get some of those issues solved on your own. And you know, knowledge is power, as they say. So it's always good to know everything you can to solve the problem and save you a lot of money in the long run as well. Okay, so kind of elaborating on the last video we did on thread shredding. If you've gone through everything we touched on that other video, such as, you know, you've got a good quality thread, you know, you've changed the needle out because needles are the cheapest thing we can replace, and they're done after about 8 hours of use. they're done. You need to replace them anyway, because the tip, even if it doesn't have a burr, can get dull, and then instead of going through the fabric really nice and smooth, it starts punching through the fabric and pushing the fabric down, and sometimes your fabric can actually get shoved down into the throat plate. So you want to double check on that. You want to make sure that you have the right, you've made sure that you had the right size needle. And just to kind of go over what we did in the last video without going into all the detail we did in the last video, take your needle out of your machine, thread it up, and you have some thread here, and then move it up and down. And if the needle moves up and down freely on the thread, you know you've got a good size for your thread. If it's hanging up, the hole in the needle is too small, you need to go up a size, or maybe go to a top stitch type needle that has a longer, bigger eye, even though it's the same size needle. Double check the bobbin case. Take a little piece of cotton swab, a cotton ball, and then rub around the bobbin case. If you feel a rough spot, chances are you've had a needle go through the bobbin race or bobbin case, and you need to file that down. How you file that down is with a simple nail file. I like to use the buffer side, which is the finest side, and it's very smooth, and you just go over the rough spot and file it down until it's very, very smooth and you don't have any rough spots on there. Check the top and the bottom, because if you have a rough spot where a hole has been punctured from your needle, then your thread can get caught on that, kind of snag and start shredding and give you issues. While you're at it, double check your throat plate. Now this is a single needle throat plate, so if you're having trouble with your fabric pushing down, this is kind of a side note, but if you're having trouble, as you know, I go onto the farm to market road sometimes and I don't stay on the highway. But if you're having trouble with the fabric getting pushed down into the throat plate area, go ahead and try changing to the, and you're doing a single straight stitch. This won't work for a zigzag obviously, but if you're doing a straight stitch, like chiffon has a tendency to want to get pushed down in real easy. Your fine fabrics do. They're more gentle, and sometimes you have them go pushing down in. Change it to a straight needle plate or a straight stitch plate, which has just a teeny tiny hole instead of the big wide hole, and that more than likely will solve the issues. But make sure you're only doing a straight stitch with your straight stitch plate. But back to what we were discussing, check that around the area where the needle passes, and check the top. Make sure you don't have any burrs on your throat plate. You can use your cotton swab again, cotton ball rather, and make sure nothing's hanging up, because if it's hanging up with the cotton ball, it's going to hang up with your thread. And again, you can file that. Take your nail file, use the buffer side, and kind of smooth it out, and chances are it'll be good as new. If it's not, you can always just replace those items. You know, go to your dealer and get them replaced. But these are little fixes that you can get a little bit. A couple of months ago, in the last video, I didn't even know that I had it until I pulled it out to demonstrate in the video and realized I had a couple of holes in there. I've smoothed it out and it's been working great for me ever since. So you can get more life if something like that happens. And like I said, it happens. I hope you can see me now. I lost the connection. I don't know if I'm back on. So I'm going to see if I get reconnected or if I've lost you and I've got to restart. So let me find out. It looks like I've lost you. Am I back? Let me refresh the page here. Someone says I'm back. Sharon says she can see me, but I'm looking at it and I can't see me. Well, I hope I'm on, but I don't see it on there. Okay, you say you see me. I can't see me. So I'm gonna, hopefully you can see me, and I will keep on going. Okay, where were we? Check the throat plate and the bobbin race. Make sure you don't have any issues. What I was going to go with next is also check your presser foot. Make sure that the presser foot doesn't have any nicks or burrs in it. So again, you can take your cotton ball, rub it along there, or take your thumb and finger and rub along there and make sure you don't have any burrs. And again, you can file those down with your nail file. And make sure that that's not causing the issues. So you've checked your quality of thread, you've checked the needle, you've checked that it's the right size. Another issue, and you've checked for burrs. Another issue that can happen is your needle can get gummed up, and that can happen with sticky stabilizers. Sometimes I think it gets old, or maybe it wasn't made well, but I think more than often than not it was probably something that had been around too long and its shelf life has passed, and it gets kind of gummy. And then also certain fabrics can have an adhesive added to them. I showed in the last video where I was sewing on a costume that had a bunch of sequins that had been glued on. My solution for that is to use the silicone spray. And I like the silicone spray because it does, you can spray a surface. It's not just, you know, touching up on the needle or what have you, but you're spraying the surface, and then when the needle penetrates, it's re-lubricating that needle so that it doesn't gum up on you. So that's a good tip. Sometimes you want to check if you can see inside where the tension discs are. Sometimes, especially if you're using cotton thread, and it has a tendency to be more fuzzy than some of the synthetic threads, it can pass through your tension discs and leave little fuzzies behind, and then you get buildup in the tension discs. So it's a good idea to take unwaxed, nothing waxed or treated dental floss, and then floss your tension discs to get maybe a loose broken thread in there or some fuzz, you know, that has built up over time. So that's kind of what we touched on with the last video. Kind of summarized it down. But in this one, what I learned that was new is that the way the thread is wound can make a difference in how you're supposed to put it on your thread. Now, I'm not saying this happens all the time. It's kind of like playing Russian roulette. So I've sewn with my parallel spools not facing the correct way, and I've been okay. But it could be a problem. So I want to let you know. And I learned this from Bob from Superior Threads. And he's the expert over there, and he knows all about threads and how they should be handled and how they're manufactured, and he knows the whole background of thread. And what I learned from him, I mean, I always knew this part of it, I just didn't know that it made a difference. So there are two types of wind, of how your thread is wound. One is a parallel wind, which it's just straight around the spool. And the other is what they call a zigzag wind. And I was able to get a variegated thread with the zigzag so that you can see that pretty clearly. It kind of goes like a zigzag. It's not just straight around the spool. Again, you've got a parallel wind and a zigzag wind. Now with the parallel wind, it's pretty forgiving. You can put it horizontally. It's meant to come off of, excuse me, the top of the thread. Let me see. Oh, here, I've got this one. This one's, I'm not having to find the end. Your cone threads are your zigzag kind of wind. And they're meant to come off of the top of the thread, or excuse me, off of the spool. That's how they're designed to come off and be delivered to your machine. So if this was put horizontally, it still would be okay because it's still coming off the top of the thread, if that makes sense. It doesn't matter if it's facing this way, it's coming off straight, and it doesn't matter if it's facing this way. Trouble is, a cone is not going to fit horizontally on your machine because it's too big. However, as you saw with this little guy, this definitely would fit horizontally and be fine. You just need to make sure you're using the right spool cap with it. Don't use a real huge one. Get the one that's small that will fit on this properly. And it will do just fine. It's not going to twist or anything. It does great. Okay, so let's say you have this kind. This is a 12-weight cotton, and it's a zigzag. I could put this vertically, or I could put it horizontally. With this one, since there's really no cap on the end, you're going to want to use this little teeny tiny spool cap. Can you see this? I'll put it in close so that you can see that. It's real tiny, and it's gray where the other ones are white for the Brother and Baby Lock machines. This goes in there and it doesn't interfere at all with the end, but it gets it on there and secures it. Now, years ago, before we even had this, we would put them on and not use a spool cap at all, because what would happen is, see, there's a little gap. I'm going to use this so you can see it, but when you put your spool cap up, that might not be a good way to example it. When you put your spool cap up, there's a gap between the thread and the end, and what would happen is the thread would kind of puddle in between, get hung up, not feed, and then we'd get needle breaks. When you use this teeny tiny spool cap, it doesn't interfere with the end at all, so it's awesome. Works great on that. And this is another zigzag twist or zigzag wind, so I can go vertically or horizontally with this one, and again, that works great. There's no cap on the end, and it's just all thread, and so I would want to use the teeny tiny one. Any kind of spool with a cap, you're going to want to use the proper spool cap, okay? But if you've got a spool of thread that doesn't have anything on the end, you've got this gap going on, you're going to want to use this little teeny weeny spool cap. Now, what happens if you've got a twist well, this one I could use the spool cap because I've got a little bit of an end here. I don't have just thread exposed on the end. So if this didn't fit and I wanted to use a vertical, I could use the vertical, or I could use a spool cap. Now, a little bit about vertical thread stands. I like the metal thread stand because it's weighted. I'm not a big fan of the plastic thread stands because they're very lightweight and your thread can pull on them or you're going to knock them over. They're not going to stand upright and you're not going to be real happy with them. This, when I bought it, which I'll admit was many, many years ago, was, you know, under $10. I think they probably still are under $10. It's worth its weight in gold. Great investment if you don't have a vertical thread stand for your machine. I highly recommend these. They're great. Okay, so here's the problem child. The parallel spool, or the parallel wound spool. I call it the problem child because he needs to be on your machine vertically, because when it pulls off, it needs to be pulling off straight to the side. It does not like to be pulled off the top, okay? And that doesn't matter if it's standing upright or horizontally. If you put this little baby on horizontally in your machine, it's going to twist. And Bob demonstrated it with some ribbon, so I'm going to do the same thing because it really hit home with me. We have a parallel wind on this ribbon, just like we have a parallel wind on this thread. And if it's pulled, if it's sitting on a vertical thread stand that goes and pulls it to the side, we do great. It comes off nice and smooth, okay? If we put it this way, horizontally in our machine, as it rolls away, let me roll it back up. If we were to put it horizontally on our machine, so here's our horizontal spool pin, and it's sitting this way, and we pull off the thread, look what happens. It starts to twist. And it twists and it twists and it twists. And it keeps twisting more and more and more. And what happens when it twists is it basically doubles its size. The diameter of the ribbon doubles in size. And so you've got twice the width of thread going through your tension disc. So that could be the first problem. It worked fine when it was nice and thin. No problems. Goes through the tension disc. Now it's twice as wide because it's all twisted up. What happens is it's going to drag on that and it's going to pull back, and you're going to see bobbin thread come to the top. When you see the bobbin thread coming to the top, probably the issue's at the top. So, you know, your bobbin thread's being pulled to the top, that means something is pulling it up. And if it's getting, your thread is getting hung up in the tension disc, it's pulling back. It's not feeding. And it could break, you know, or it could cause a needle to break, actually. If it's not feeding, it's going to actually cause your needle to break. If it's not getting pulled through the tension disc and your needle's trying to pull it. So you could have a couple of different issues with that. The other thing, say it gets through the tension discs just fine. It manages through the tension disc even though it's twice as thick. Then it gets to the eye of the needle, and the eye of the needle now is trying to accommodate a thread that you tested for a nice slim thread. Now it's twice as thick. Well, it's pushing through that hole and it's rubbing and it starts to shred. So that's an issue. So what if we were to put this on a vertical thread stand like this? Now we know it doesn't work this way. A parallel wind does not work when it gets pulled off the top of the thread, right? It needs vertical where it can pull off from the side. But what happens if we put it in a thread stand and pull it up off the top? We get the same issue. It starts to twist. So this thread, this little parallel wound thread, has got to be on a vertical stand that comes from the side, not from the top, either vertically or horizontally. I hope that makes sense. So that being the case, I thought, well, let me look at some of my threads here. And you know, I was looking at a lot of my metallics, a lot of my older metallics, and I love the metallic thread from the embroidery store. They're online. They're some of the more reasonable thread. It's a King Star thread, but it's great because it doesn't have any memory. Let me get this out of the way. And when I looked at it, I noticed that it's a zigzag wind. So I thought, well, that's good. It's not a parallel wind. Not that a parallel wind is bad. It's not. It's just that you need to know how to get it on the machine so it feeds the way it was meant to be fed on a machine. So put it on a vertical stand that will pull from the side. It's not going to pull and create extra tension. It just rolls off. And you can test this on your machine at home. But this is a zigzag wind, so I can use it on a vertical thread stand that pulls from the top, or I could put it in the machine horizontally and it would come off the top and it would be just fine. It doesn't have to come off the side since it's a zigzag wind. Now I looked at some of my older stuff, and this was a parallel wind. This tinsel thread was a parallel wind. This one was a parallel wind. And I thought to myself, you know, maybe it wasn't the thread so much as it was how I was putting it on my machine. You know, I was probably putting it on horizontally and not using the little thread stand that comes with a lot of machines. So if you're having trouble with thread shredding, you might might try that and double check and see if you've got a zigzag wind on your thread or a parallel wind on your thread, and see if that doesn't fix your problem. Now, I did, I'm going to push all this aside because I want to bring my machine up here, because lo and behold, on my dream machine, I didn't see a vertical thread stand. Well, let me reiterate. It does. These babies are getting heavier and heavier, aren't they? Okay, it does have a vertical thread stand, but as I just demonstrated, we can't have a parallel wind going up because it's going to twist. We need a parallel wind, or on a parallel wind, we need a vertical thread stand that will pull from the side so it doesn't twist. So I played around with this machine and I found some dual duty thread, and I know some dealers really dislike dual duty thread, and this might be why, because maybe they've been running into issues with the parallel wind being put horizontal, you know, on the horizontal spool and getting twisted and then causing issues in shredding. And that's, it needs to be on a vertical thread stand, but it needs to be able to be pulled off from the side, not the top. So I played around with this machine and I put it on my vertical thread stand, but instead of going through this this thread guide, I went through a couple of the thread guides for my bobbin winding. I went through the thread guide number 2, and I went on the back of number 3, and then I threaded, and you can see there's just no tension whatsoever. It's pulling off really nice. So I can thread it as I normally would, using both hands to make sure it gets clicked into that take-up lever, and then thread as I normally would. Now I want to tilt the machine so that you can see something else. When I did this, again, I went through guide, I'm going to pull this off so that you can see. I went through guide number 2, and let me tilt this. There, I think you can see it. I went through guide number 2, which is for the bobbin winding, and then I went through guide number 3, and then I went straight into thread. The other thing I want you to make absolutely sure, if you try this, make absolutely sure that your thread is not rubbing up against the plastic of your machine. If you'll notice, there's metal going in surrounding the plastic parts going into the thread path, and there's a reason for that. If you have the thread rubbing up against the plastic, over time that can actually cut a groove in the plastic. So make absolutely sure, if you're going to use a parallel wind, that that thread is not giving you, rubbing up against the plastic on your machine, because heaven forbid you do not want to have any grooves cut in your machine. That would be horrifying. So, I haven't really noticed a lot of issues putting my parallel wind horizontally. Let me get this out of the way. I haven't noticed it, but if you are noticing some shredding and you've tested everything else, you've made sure everything else is working great, look at your spool and see if it's a parallel wind, and then if you're still having some shredding issues, you might try that alternate threading method if you don't have a vertical thread stand that will actually pull to the side. Like the Dream Machine, and I noticed on the Quattro, I didn't have a vertical thread stand like in the old days where it was vertical but it pulled from the side. So I hope you've learned something today, like I did, because I didn't realize that it would make a difference either horizontally or vertically which way I put my spools of thread based on a parallel wind versus a zigzag line, wind. It seems like the zigzag winds, that's what most of my thread is, which is happy. It makes me happy because I don't have to really think about it too much. But it's good to know that you might run into an issue with the parallel wind if it's put on the horizontal or being pulled where it can twist and then double up and get these twists and knots in it before it can get there. It's really evident when you see a parallel wind on some tinsel thread here. This is a metallic tinsel thread, and this, you know, metal thread here, metallic is made from, you know, there's metal in it, has a lot of memory. And what I mean by that is it remembers how it was wound, and so it's got a lot of twisting going on. If I come in here closer, you can maybe see that where there's a lot of twisting going on. So that's why those can be problematic, I think, because they have a tendency to remember and twist up, and why they put them on teeny tiny spools just to make the twist tighter doesn't seem to make sense to me. But this, again, the King Star metallic thread from the embroidery store, which is online, is awesome metallic thread. I don't have any issues with it breaking, and I love it. So again, hope you've picked up a tip or two. And oh, I know what else. I wanted to cover one other little thing before we go, and before I check and see if there's any questions. Did you know how to check your cotton thread to see if it's gone bad? Like I said early on, I would not use thread in my machine that was really old from grandma, or somebody got in an estate sale or something like that. I just wouldn't do it. I'd go ahead and spend the $5 for a new spool of thread ahead of that. But you can test it by, this is cotton thread, and it's good, and you're going to want to just kind of slowly pull it until it snaps. And if it snaps, it's good thread. If it kind of stretches and then breaks, it's bad. You might as well just throw it away. Now, I know that's true with cotton thread. I'm not 100% sure if that's true with the synthetics. I noticed when I did some testing that some of my old metallic threads would stretch and then break, whereas this from the embroidery store, you know, when I pulled it slowly, it snapped and broke just fine. You know, it was really good thread too, so it didn't stretch and then break. So I'm not sure on the synthetics. So if anybody does know the rule of that on synthetic thread, let me know, because I'd like to know too. But yeah, it's best to have, you know, you've got a really good metallic thread when you pull off a bunch of it and you make a U in it, and it doesn't have any memory. It just is like cotton. It just kind of puddles. It doesn't wind and twist up. If it's winding and twist up, it's probably going to give you some issues. You're probably going to have to treat it extra special kind. But I don't have that kind of time. I know that works, and I can recommend it all day long and not feel bad about it at all. It's, you know, if it works, it works. I stick with it. So again, let me double check and see if we have any questions over here. Before we go. And like I said, I will double check afterwards too to make sure and answer everybody's questions. Josephine, the closed captioning doesn't happen until after the video's been posted. It takes a couple of hours for the captioning to be transcribed. It can't be closed captioned. I don't have a transcriber sitting with me to transcribe as I talk. So that will be later on this evening or tomorrow morning when it gets posted. It just depends on, I have to send it out to a service to get it captions, but all of my videos do have captioning. It's just not immediate. And Judy, see, Judy's saying, great ideas. I had a terrible time. Let me get this on facing you guys. I had a terrible time with shredding the other day when I was using the embroidery module. A little screw fell down on the embroidered area. It sewed fine for a while, and then it started shredding. My machine weighs a ton. Oh, don't they all? And so I tried to figure out the problem before I took it to the dealer. I finally gave up and took it in. The screw was from the needle bar. They put it back in and it works fine. I guess it was a fluke. Maybe not. It sounds like the screw, when it came out, might have exposed a rough spot on the thread path. You know, where your needle bar is, there might have been exposure there to a little rough spot that the screw covered up. And once they got the screw back in there, the problem went away. So I bet that was all there was. Betty said, thanks for the explanation. She'll be paying attention from now on. I will be too, Betty. I just didn't know. But now I have another little tidbit for future problems that might come up. Anne said she's going to go check her threads now. Dina says she has the Martilli thread stand and it solved that problem. I'll have to look at that. Does the Martilli thread stand pull from the side, or is it, you know, a vertical where it pulls from the top? Because I'll have to, because it makes a difference with the parallel. It's great for the horizontal, I mean for the zigzag wind on threads, but you don't want it going up, you know, for your parallel threads. Oh my goodness, let's see. I'm trying to read, sorry, I wish I had somebody here to help me, but it's me flying solo, so we just have to kind of roll where we can here. Marilyn Nicotra wants to know where you can get that tiny spool cap. Well, it came with my Dream Machine, so I know that any Baby Lock or Brother dealer will carry that tiny spool cap. And it should fit on different models of machines, I would think, because, you know, our threads fit, you know, oh, what is that doohickey called that you put your thread on? The spindle. Those seem to be the pretty standard size between different companies. So I would think that the teeny tiny spool cap would work on different models. But I know for a fact that Baby Lock and Brother dealers would carry those. See. I'm so glad I got back this time. Last time I didn't. I finished the whole thing and I was talking to myself. So that's why I thought I'd better ask this time before continuing on. Okay, it looks like everybody's saying they could see me again. I'm getting through those. Okay, it looks like I got through all of the questions that we had now. So I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. If you think of any other questions, because if you're like me, you think of the question after you leave the classroom or you leave the room, or when you lay your head down to go to sleep, it's like, oh, I meant to ask that. That happens to me too. So if you think of anything, just let me know. And I'll be checking the feed and answer the questions there. So again, if you've missed it, check my Facebook page, check the my YouTube channel. It'll get posted later with captions, or it'll get posted later on Facebook with captions. They'll be added, I should say, later. And then I'll also post it on Pinterest. So it was great seeing you guys, and loved being able to interact with you a little bit and answer the questions as they came along. I'll get better at this. It's a process. So until next Tuesday, thanks for joining me. Bye-bye for now.